Thanks for having me on. Hopefully you can see the slides there. Yeah, so I guess what I've put together is to just go through what I see as kind of emerging risks that are coming up, or kind of leading edge stuff that's happening. I guess since Nexus has launched, we launched in 2019 and stuff, and so I guess we've seen the DeFi space evolve since then. Basically from its start, and I think one thing I've noticed over the past probably about 6 months or so in particular is the fact that we're kind of we're definitely moving away from isolated smart contracts systems that go through heavy audits and stuff like that to much more integrated systems with many kind of different bits and pieces being put together to make a wider product for users and things. And so I think that kind of just general trend is definitely changing the kind of risk landscape around what people are developing. And so I kind of wanted to kind of go through the main areas that we're seeing as the kind of risk areas that we're kind of keeping an eye on. And I guess it's kind of quite important from Nexus's point of view, because we also want to design products that work for the risks that are in the space. And we also kind of want to understand roughly where the risks are and how much it might cost and all that type of stuff, obviously. So this is kind of how we're seeing things evolving, and some early thoughts. Don't necessarily have any answers here, but just probably wanted to go through the main areas that we're seeing higher risk or emerging risks coming from. So yeah, there's, I guess, 4 main areas, and I did do these slides before 10 minutes ago. So first one being cross-chain bridges and protocols. I think we're definitely in the early stages here, and I think very few of the current cross-chain bridges offer both a decentralization and high security levels to users. There's often some different assumptions about, or different setups about, centralized multi-sigs or small sets of nodes, a small number of nodes run by the protocol, and so it's still effectively centralized. And that's kind of what we've seen so far. And so I guess the big recent ones, like there's the wormhole bridge, and Ronin just being breached. Well, it was actually six days ago, if I'm reading things correctly. But 600 million loss, and essentially breached a 5 of 9 multi-sig, as far as I can tell, from the very quick reading I did just before this. So I think that's definitely an area of interest to us. It's going to become more and more key with lots of different chains, and wanting to able to bridge. And I think that's a very interesting one, because from a user point of view, I think the users don't really understand at all what type of risk they're taking here, especially as it's really quite early. I guess the next one will be layer 2 solutions. So there's obviously a lot of work happening here, and a lot of planned adoption, especially within the Ethereum ecosystem. It's a really valuable kind of addition to the whole ecosystem, but it's still quite early in terms of adoption levels. Haven't grown to 2% of TVL yet, but obviously we've got to start somewhere. But I think the point here is they haven't really been battle tested. You've got more protocols deploying on layer 2 solutions, but they kind of need wider adoption to see what happens there. And I guess if you're talking about optimistic rollups, then they're probably the most widely implemented, but we haven't really tested like the exit type scenarios, etc., in reality, and to see if they how they work. And I think there are still some like training wheel type of structures around in places that people have to be aware of. So it's not kind of fully decentralized stuff yet in most cases. And I guess on the zero knowledge side, there's also the fraud proof stuff that I describe zero knowledge tech as fantastic and really kind of powerful, but also it's it's a bit harder to audit and test and get the security levels as high as non-zero knowledge stuff right now. The next one will be kind of smart contract integrations interfaces. So I think more broadly, like going back to my old job in insurance world, I used to have two teams. And so one team was like the data team, and they kind of just pulled together the data information of all the, kind of policy information and stuff. And then we had an actuarial team, which took that data and then made a whole bunch of assumptions and projected out what the premiums and the claims would be, and et cetera, and work out the value of the book of business. And so those two types of teams. And one thing that I really appreciated after running those teams for several years was the fact that every major mistake that we had was because the data team and the actuarial team had a miscommunication about what the definition of a particular data field was in the data that they were providing. It was, it had a name or a header or maybe a description in a document, but the misinterpretation of exactly what that definition was meant that the actuarial team made some assumptions about how they should model it, and they got that wrong because of the misinterpretation. And so I think that's a very kind of good analogy just for the real world, but how when we're building smart contract systems that interact with each other, it's the integrations, the interface points that that can bring a lot of risk. We also held Nexus held a kind of a Twitter Spaces event with Immunify, and the kind of the CEO basically shared that faulty integrations were the root cause of major root cause of underlying disclosures on their platform. So it's definitely a popular one. Yeah, it's all kind of just making about misunderstanding of definitions of how something works or an assumption about how something works. And the last category just want to go into a little bit on is decentralized governance and kind of contract updates. A good example of here is how can a decentralized DAO update its contracts? Compound is a good example where you've got a really kind of battle tested protocol. You want to make a small change. Obviously, it has to go through some sort of review cycle. But how does everyone in the DAO get comfortable that that's okay, or the audits have been done appropriately? Maybe everyone's kind of looking at each other and assuming someone else has done the review. You've got to community-based reviews and all the rest of it. But even if all of that kind of process is done, you're still introducing additional risk because there's a change that you're pushing through. And at what point do these types of base level protocols do they become absolutely solid and don't change, and the risk of change becomes too much, etc. So there's those types of questions, which I guess it's also argument when you're talking about Bitcoin versus Ethereum and a whole bunch of other things. But that type of question is definitely an interesting one to think about. And obviously Compound did have a risk, a issue that they introduced with and then they had a time lock, which meant that it was hard to fix it, etc. So yeah, a few questions on that side of things. Yeah, so I guess just more broadly, Moody's and Gauntlet have put together a risk framework about the different types and classifications of risks. I don't absolutely 100% agree with all of the classifications. I probably would have done it slightly differently, but I think it's really good overall. And it's kind of a good way to think about things, especially when we're onboarding, I guess, more serious institutional type participants into the ecosystems. They want to understand these types of things before they start allocating funds, and that they putting it in a format that they can understand when they're used to reading like Moody's AAA rating, all that type of stuff. If you're presented in something similar, then it kind of their risk teams can actually assess things. So it makes a lot of sense. In terms of the ticks there, just wanted to that's basically what Nexus's product cover. We don't cover the blockchain risk, like basically because as an example, we're running on Ethereum. We don't, if Ethereum goes down for whatever reason, then we don't cover that risk. We cover the risks of the protocols running on whatever blockchain it is. And so, throughout the presentation, we just kind of classify. You'll be able to see on the slides where each of these risks is kind of classified in these different buckets.
Do you take questions or
please so questions as you go.
Of these risks, do you have a way to evaluate which one is more significant, or is that do you have some data? Probably not at this point, or is that some?
No, we don't at this point. I think to be fair, we've had we write coverage on over 100 different protocols, and we've really had 4 major claim events over the 2 years. So when it comes down to it, that's really a low level of data to be able to do proper kind of analysis stuff on. But in terms of classifying different protocols into a bunch of those risks, I mean, pretty much everything has a smart contract risk. There's nearly always a governance risk. Oracle risk tends to come up into it as well. If there's a DAO behind it, there's a cooperative risk. So you've basically, in reality, pretty much all protocols are running pretty much all of these risks anyway. It's just, I guess, it's to the extent that which one's greater than another. We don't tend to. The regulatory risk and currency risk is a bit kind of global, hence it's in the systemic category to a large extent. But we more focus on the idiosyncratic risks for the particular protocols, and I think we kind of think about it mainly in terms of 3 buckets: the smart contract security technical type risk, which is kind of the core of what our products offer. Then there's kind of the Oracle risk and the governance type of can someone take over, can control this, etc. And so I guess the other aspect that's kind of not on there explicitly is economic incentive misalignment. So for example, there's often staking mechanisms or something to make sure that the behavior of participants is aligned with what you want them to do. And if you get that wrong, then maybe in the worst case, someone could steal all the funds in the pool. And so that's kind of those are the kind of 3 main risks. And I'd probably, the ones we tend to focus on are the economic incentive ones, smart contract risk and Oracle risk. Governance risk really hasn't come into it yet. Make is probably an interesting discussion point there. They did have an issue that they fixed a while ago, but mostly governance risk is a bit funny because pretty much all DeFi protocols run with a multi-sig behind things, and the DAO is you get voting power, but the multi-sig effectively has the ultimate control of updating. So you're kind of relying on the individuals or the small team behind the system anyway right now. Hopefully that changes in the future. So yeah, I think it's if I have to pick the 2 big ones, it's probably the smart contract risk and the economic guarantee stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, please jump in if you've got questions. Yeah, so I'll go into a bit. I'm just going to go into a bit more detail on these 4 risks. I think on the cross-chain bridges, and I'm very interested in other people's points of view on this stuff because, to be honest, I'm not a technical expert on any of this stuff. I guess I view things from a bit more of a higher level. So yeah, so please, if you have points, then please jump in. I think in particular the cross-chain bridges are basically going to be a honeypot for attackers. If there's a vulnerability, it basically they're going to be able to access a large amount of funds pretty easily. So I mean, this is all about I mean, most of them aren't battle tested yet. There's many cross-chain protocols bridging. We're obviously in a bull market, so people are trying to get liquidity and stuff up as quickly as possible, which means they likely sacrifice on security or centralization, more likely in the short term. And you're essentially relying on a small group of node operators or a multi-sig to effectively secure a whole lot of funds, and that can become a massive issue, as looks like what's happened to Ronin just recently. So I think one of the points here is like users don't really understand how they operate, like that they think that their asset just gets bridged to another chain because it's called a bridge, right? But they don't understand that even once they're past that bridge, they still continuously rely on the security of that bridge for the value of their asset. If the bridge goes down, everything on the other side of the bridge is worth nothing. So I think that doesn't. Because of that, I think people are taking more risk than they think they are, and so I'm confident cross-chain bridges and protocols will become battle tested and become quite secure. I just think we're probably a bit ahead of ourselves right now. We've had the wormhole bridge exploit, multi-chain has been hacked, the Qubit finance has been hacked. Like there's quite a lot of material ones here, and I think the interesting point here compared to other stuff is how big the hacks can be very quickly. Like wormhole and Ronin are huge relative to some of the other ones because they become a honeypot and like lots of assets going into there.
And in all of these cases, it's not a single individual. It's like multi. Do people know how do they got that? It's a single person that was able to.
The worm on the wormhole one, the attacker bypassed a signature verification process, and so they injected a malicious instruction. It used like an old function and allowed the attacker to forge a message to essentially mint unlimited assets. And so there was basically faulty verification on the messaging side of things, and so they could pull out all the wrapped ETH on the Ethereum side of the Ethereum Solana bridge and just take the money, and so everything's unbacked at that point. With Ronin, they're running a 5 of 9 multi-sig, and the private keys got breached to the multi-sig. So that's there are different systems here, but if there's a multi-sig, at some point the assets are going to get pretty big that it becomes a massive target. So I think that's and that can happen quite quickly. Like the teams can go, oh, we've developed something, we know it's not perfect, we've put a multi-sig behind this, that's fine for a while, and then all of a sudden after a few months there's hundreds of millions of assets in there, and they haven't necessarily gone back to update that because it's not a priority or whatever. So yeah, I think that type of thing is quite easy to overlook. Cool. I guess on the Nexus side of things, we don't specifically cover bridge risks right now. We've specifically not listed a few things because we've been worried about this quite highly. I mean, I know Nexus is supposed to take on risk, but at some point, it doesn't make sense even for us. And so I think from a product development point of view, this is one area where we're definitely looking at trying to how we can structure the products in the right way. Yeah, so I guess moving on to layer 2 stuff. So we've seen quite a lot of, especially in the, like, I guess, Ethereum ecosystem, like Arbitrum and Optimism are getting some traction. There's kind of zero knowledge stuff, there's like ZK Sync as well, and Starkware. And so, but we're not kind of like at widespread adoption yet. It's more kind of experimental phase, and some protocols are just testing out different things on different layers. And so that's fine. But I think that's fine for where we're at, but I guess these scaling solutions haven't really been fully battle tested yet, and I'd expect like them to be more tested as the more assets get in there. And so I think the other points are that you've got some aspects of layer 2 stuff that's actually centralized, such as the hardware securing Arbitrum. And like they suffered some downtime due to hardware failure in one of their sequencer nodes. And so you like that's fine for you know, early adoption and stuff like that, but it's obviously those types of things need to be sorted out, and you know, I'm sure they will be, but just in terms of where we are in the adoption and security spectrum, we're still quite early, and I think like, so there's quite a few centralized aspects of most of these right now. I guess on the other side, zero knowledge is coming to the market. It's earlier in development and it's more complicated, but I guess from my perspective, the zero knowledge stuff is often a lot harder to audit than, or the pool of auditors is likely smaller than for the other stuff. So it's harder to get an audit. It's hard anyway to get audits, and so that's an additional risk factor to bring in. I guess the other one is like, there was a white hat payment through Immunify for Optimism of about 2 million for a critical vulnerability in the OVM. So like these are, we are really kind of at that early stage, and I'd just be cautious on that one. On the layer 2 stuff, we are effectively covering that in different places, in particular like DYDX on Starkware, and some of the other systems. So you know, that is already being covered by Nexus in as part of our bundled product. Cool. I'll move on. Yeah. So this is the one I kind of gave a little bit more background on at the start, and I think it's a very important one, and it's a very like fuzzy one. It's hard to pin down, but yeah, as I described before, like we in a little while ago we hosted Duncan Townsend, who's the CTO of Immunify, and he's on, and he basically shared that faulty integrations were like the leading root cause behind most of the vulnerability disclosures they get. And so this is like, you know, a lending protocol adds assets to the marketplace. It can lead to reentrancy, or they borrow code from another smart contract system, but they don't fully understand all the details because they didn't develop it themselves. And all that type of stuff poses quite a lot of risk. And the more and more things we put together, the more and more risk there is there, because it's next to impossible for a developer or a small group of developers to understand the entire stack, and like I don't think that's reasonable, but also understanding the interfaces and the assumptions that you're making when you integrate with is kind of critical. The Gnosis chain hack recently with 100 Finance and Agave, they effectively ported over existing protocols that run on Ethereum and started running them on Gnosis chain, but the WXDAI token that only runs on Gnosis chain has different hooks available to it, and effectively I think they effectively allowed a re-entrancy attack because they included an asset that the original protocols that were never designed to handle. And so, you know, assumptions that this has been audited and it's all fine, and then you add something else and all of a sudden it's not fine. So that's happened quite a few times. We've had Cream Finance with the ample re-entrancy attack in 2021. Rari Capital got exploited. But they integrated with Alpha Homera to deposit ETH for their IB ETH, and they didn't factor in the total ETH calculation. And so Alpha had mitigated that against it, but Rari didn't mitigate it in their internal calculation. So you kind of needed an additional check in your own smart contracts to handle it, and Rari didn't realize that. One of the more scary ones from quite recently was Chain Security discovered and reported a vulnerability in the C token contract in Compound for TUSD, and that could have had a big problem, a big issue, but they avoided it and fixed the contracts. So these types of things can also impact big established protocols as well. So this one's one of the it's one of the challenging ones. I also think from an audit point of view, a security assessment point of view, I think this one's challenging because it requires you to understand where the line is of what you're testing and what you're not testing or auditing. And it's often, especially if you're auditing something that's integrated with a lot of stuff, do you go all the way deep into everything else? Or do you draw the line of your audit simply around the protocol that you're looking at, and what assumptions do you make in that? And I think it's quite easy to make an assumption that you draw the line somewhere, and that makes logical sense from a time and cost point of view. But it's also quite easy for the audit to make assumptions that yes, something else outside is fine, and it's not an issue.
This seems like a place where automation, like what we do at Certora, could potentially really help, because if we had a technical specification that defined that boundary, then we could do separate audits on each side and ensure that the interface is well specified.
Yeah, I think so. I was going to actually ask you that question. So when you do your formal verification, because you can define the rule you're testing against is, it doesn't matter where the issue might be, whether it's inside the system that you're auditing or potentially outside, it should capture it, is my understanding. Does that make sense?
In principle, yes. In practice, sometimes we have to make assumptions about underlying systems just so that the technology can handle the whole system. But breaking things down modularly so that we can handle both sides of that, make the assumption on one side and then check the assumption on the other side, is something we're thinking about, but we in practice are not doing yet.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I guess moving on, decentralized governance contract updates. So I guess there's the kind of typical contract update one, which is an interesting one where you got the DAO who wants to deliver something quickly and all the rest of it, and make a change, and it's kind of moved away from perhaps that core team in the background, diligently supporting it, and then how do you make sure that the security levels and the practices are up to scratch? And as happens in DAOs with a lot of things, everyone kind of looks at each other and goes, yeah, you did that, didn't you? Oh, just assume that it's not my responsibility. And because we don't have defined org structures about so-and-so is responsible for this action and all the rest of it, it's all really messy. Stuff like this can easily fall through the cracks. So I think it's really beneficial for DAOs to have security teams, partnerships with audit firms or whatever it is, to make sure that process is going through. You need to have a release process and stuff here, otherwise you can very quickly trip over things. And Compounded, my understanding, is they're actually really good on that type of stuff, and even stuff can slip through there. So it's a challenging one to work through, especially as you get more and more decentralized and stuff. So there's this kind of tragedy of the commons type issue. So there's that type of stuff which verges into the human process type risk, and I think that's a large part of this. Obviously, as soon as you bring humans into it, mistakes can obviously be made, more likely to be made. And so I think that's an interesting one. I'd also like there's also the point about time locks and stuff. So time locks are great from a security perspective on one angle, but they can hamstring you on the other side. And so I don't actually know where I sit on are they good or not. They're really good in some aspects, but they can be a really big problem in others. There was I can't remember the underlying issue. Oh, there was a cream hack, and Aave had the same issue, and they very quickly got it fixed and put it into production, but it has to go through the time lock. And so they're in this really awkward spot about not being able to talk about anything. Just there's a contract upgrade going through, everyone kind of knowing that something's wrong, but not being able to speak about it. And, you know, you're in this really awkward spot. So obviously time locks really help on anti-attack vectors, but they restrict on the security practices as well. So, you know, don't know how we kind of manage those two things. I think it's a really difficult problem. One potential solution on that one is you have a security team which can, like, they can't do anything about from pause operations, and then that allows you to get something through, but that obviously has, you know, business implications in terms of the protocol goes down for however many days. But there are I guess those, you have to kind of balance those types of things. The other one, I think that's probably the biggest one in this category. The other one that's probably worth mentioning, but it's, I guess, quite a bit smaller for now, is the kind of attack of a decentralized governance system where you kind of get enough voting power somehow to force through a malicious proposal to effectively, you know, the worst one being, oh, we just take all the money or upgrade the contracts to give all the money to ourselves. And so we actually saw that a little while ago. I can't remember the name of the protocol, unfortunately. It was a relatively small one, but someone that got enough voting power and just upgraded the contracts, took all the funds. And I think that's not really much of an issue right now, except for a few systems, because there aren't actually that many systems that run full on-chain governance. Nexus is one of them, actually. Maker is one of them. Gnosis does it as well in places. And so I think that's going to become more and more prevalent as we work out the ways to run cheap voting governance via a snapshot or something, but then have it execute via smart contracts rather than trust a multi-sig to actually do the execution step. So yeah, I guess that's something also to be aware of in the future. But yeah, again, that's the kind of human aspect to it that makes these things a bit more difficult. And so, you know, when you're modeling that stuff, is like, how likely can someone buy up this many tokens to drain the whole thing, and all those types of scenarios. And that's more like kind of economic threat type scenario analysis rather than is the code technically correct. So yeah, that how do you audit that type of stuff and things? It's, you know, it's a bit more challenging. Yeah, so honestly, that's the stuff I wanted to go through, and yeah, we're really happy to get comments and things on this. I think, I guess, while I've got you here, I'll plug a little bit of Nexus for 2 minutes. One of the things that we're doing right now is working on a big V2 update. And one of the big things that will enable is what we're calling syndicates. And they essentially become like sub-DAOs within Nexus that price risk. And so experts that are good at pricing risk can, like, run a syndicate and decide on prices per and stakes per system or risk that they want to cover, like Compound or Uniswap or whatever. And then they can attract delegated stakes and earn revenue and stuff for that. So that's kind of like the most simplest version of a syndicate, but there's quite a lot to it. But, you know, the idea being that we're trying to attract external risk experts to the overall system to so that we can increase our just broader community risk knowledge and hopefully make the wider ecosystem a lot safer. So yeah, that's a little bit about Nexus and what we're doing as well. But yeah, very happy to. That's all I've got. But very happy to take questions and comments and things, because yeah, love further discussion on this stuff.
I don't know if others. I have many questions, but I should let others speak first.
I have a question about the governance slide before. There is a system that allows any user to borrow voting power for Aave, for Compound. Do you think it like adds another layer of governance risk?
Yeah, it does. Maker was exposed to this a while ago, and they actually updated their contracts to prevent the kind of flash borrow, vote, then give the money back. And I think when people are designing governance systems, they should definitely have that in mind, so that it's not simply a snapshot type approach. Maybe there's locking mechanisms or something like that. So you can't just borrow in one block, vote, and then give the money back. So you need to actually hold the assets over a period of time. Obviously, you could still borrow them on the markets if the markets are deep enough. And that's kind of where the economic analysis kind of comes into it. But yeah, I think especially as we move to kind of more on-chain governance, triggering actual code upgrades, this type of risk analysis needs to be a lot stronger, and you need to have those mechanisms to prevent the flash borrow vote attack.
Right. And another question, what do you think about parametric insurance, where the criteria for the claim is just some kind of line in the code, yeah, like if the coin is pegged to the dollar or not pegged to US dollar or something like this. Is it a viable solution for risk in DeFi?
I think I'm going to say I think it has a fundamental flaw, but they're not the general parametric insurance, but that, because if you think about it, you're relying on reading a contract that you know is broken to give you the correct results to pay out on the insurance. So that might work most of the time, but then it may not work because, for example, if you're using the trigger to say, is the money still in the contract at the right levels, and the contract doesn't return the correct result, but the money's gone, then you never pay out. A really kind of hard example on that is the parity multi-sig wallet issues from way back. The money's still there, but no one can access them. So you should say that, yeah, you should get a claim payment because the money's gone, but a parametric cover may not actually pay out. So I guess from Nexus's point of view, we've created a voting mechanism as the oracle instead. And so the choices between trying to take a fully straight down the line, unbiased approach, the kind of balance between them is, on one side, the parametric approach, you've got a risk that the faulty contract gives you faulty information and doesn't pay out. On Nexus's approach, you're effectively trusting the DAO, the claims assessment process, to vote in the correct way. So there's never going to be both have some doubt. The question is what levels and all that type of thing. The reason we decided to go with the voting approach for Nexus is you're much more flexible in what products you can offer. Like, we can offer products that people vote on off-chain events. So we could write earthquake coverage or something like that, because people could look at data off-chain or whatever. So you're not kind of restricted to just on-chain data. Anyway, so there's a business reason why we decided to go that way. Anyway, but yeah, so definitely there's pluses and minuses, but I wouldn't want to have a coverage that accidentally didn't pay out because of some technical flaw on it. So yeah.
Right.
So technical question, what are the main difference between V1 and V2? You already mentioned, but what are the...
Yeah, so there's quite a lot. It's more about I'll go, there's a few different categories. One, I'll start at the most simple. The claims assessment functionality is just being it's changed slightly in terms of the mechanisms. Conceptually and philosophically, it's very similar, but it's a lot of it's gas optimization. From the kind of product point of view or coverage point of view, it's a lot more flexibility. Like, we'll natively represent the covers as NFTs. We'll allow people to edit them, so increase, decrease, extend, renew, rather than just having them fixed once bought. So make them much more flexible. But the biggest change from a kind of strategic point of view is really this syndicates, where at the moment, if you want to stake on stuff, then you need to have NXM, and then you choose individually how to stake that NXM. What we've found is that there's two groups of a lot of the experts that are good at risk don't necessarily have funds to stake. And so what we've done with this syndicate approach is create a delegated staking model where you can have a risk expert direct the stakes, and a passive person who wants to earn staking yields delegate their stake to the risk expert to allocate for them. And then there's a fee share between those two. And so it allows people with knowledge to earn revenue when they don't have capital, and it allows the people with capital to stake when they don't necessarily have the time or expertise to do that. So that's kind of the broad one. The syndicates are also going to allow much more kind of businesses to be built on top of Nexus, like turn Nexus into more of a protocol. And it's going to allow things like distribution systems where you can create bundled products, have a natively yield-bearing vault token that's natively covered with Nexus and just allows the user to deposit into a covered vault rather than a normal vault. And it just takes the cover price out of the yield and all that type of stuff. So it's going to really help with that type of thing. I guess another big change is moving our pricing on chain. We've been running that off chain for a while, mainly because it's quite sensitive in terms of getting it right. But now we're confident we know how to do this stuff. And so we're going to be pushing that on chain, which is going to mean people can much more easily integrate with us. They don't have to call APIs. They can just do it on the smart contract level. So yeah, that's obviously a big step forward for decentralization as well. So yeah, it hits quite a few things within the system. Conceptually, things running the same way, but it's a lot of kind of enhancements in terms of functionality.
What are the risks that your protocol engaged? What kind of risk are there for you?
I mean, obviously we run the normal DeFi protocol risks, such as smart contract risks and everything else that everyone else does. And I guess from our perspective, the main things that we have to manage are more kind of insurance type risk management aspects. We've got to make sure that we don't cover too much of any one risk, so that if there's a big blow up, we can still pay claims and we're not totally wiped out. So we have to have capacity limits on the different risks that we offer and things like that, relative to the size of the amount of assets that we have in the pool. We have to make sure that when we're writing cover in DAI terms versus ETH terms, that we've got enough DAI and ETH to pay the claims. And so we have to do kind of treasury management side of things. And also on the other side of it, we will invest our pool of assets, and we'll do that quite conservatively. And we've started doing that quite conservatively, but we want to also increase that. And so we have to make sure that where we're investing it, we're not also providing coverage for, because then if there's an issue, we lose our assets and we have to pay out claims. And so that creates a kind of correlation or systemic issue. So we have to kind of manage those kind of exposure type risks overall. And I guess insurance works best when you're kind of exposed to a lot of different things. You're diversifying your risk basis. So you've got lots of small exposures all to these different things. And so increasing the business lines that we write, the different risks that we write, is going to give us more resilience, because then we can write more business, but also any one particular failure is not likely to threaten the entire mutual. So that's the type of thing that we also, apart from all of the kind of technical stuff, that's the type of risk management aspects that we also focus on.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Thank you for the enlightening talk. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Not a problem at all. Thanks everyone. Hopefully you found that interesting. Happy to please get in touch if you've got any other follow-ups or anything. Happy to answer them.